look at the Ellendorf Inn. I'm Claudine Close, the president of Historic Red Hook. I think all of Tivoli is here. Oh my God, this is great. So we won't make this too long because I know some of you are standing. I'm sorry. There are more chairs coming in. Thank you. So very briefly, every town has an important story in its past that often is forgotten. And it's because the people, come in. You may have to stand in the back, sorry. Because people forget over time that there are important stories important to the history of the town. But we are fortunate because we have today two people who know about this story of Ward Manor. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our first presenter, Emily. Emily Majer, I think she needs no introduction. But we, Historic Red Hook, we're very proud to have her as a member of our board of directors. And she is incredible. I think we like to think that we're one of the first groups to discover her talents. But we actually know that we have to share her with other organizations. She has all these titles. She's assistant town historian. She's deputy mayor of Tivoli. She Palatine Farmstead board member, and she has her own business, White Lake Hill Preservation. So we like to have her all the time, but we know we have to share her because she is unique, and we know that she needs very little incentive just to go tearing off on incredible research adventures. So Ward Manor is one of these research adventures. And we are also fortunate to have Donna Matthews here, who is very much a part of the story that you're going to hear. Hey, come in. Maybe standing in one place. All right. And I think you all know Donna Matthews too, but we're lucky to have perspectives from two people who know more about this story than I think anybody has heard in a long time. But before I welcome them up here, I want to also invite you to come on Thursday night, any of you who are free at 7 o'clock, because we are going to be talking about a project that actually Emily first dreamed about, I think in the middle of the night. This is a map of the town of Rhinebeck that included Red Hook, drawn in 1798. And I think in the middle of the night you said, wouldn't it be great if we could identify all of these buildings and see if they're still here? And then along came Bard's Greta Trichroman, who is here, with her students, who is a map geek. And she and her students have made an interactive version of this. So Thursday night, we're going to invite anybody who is interested in maps and history, and local history particularly, to come and learn how we can contribute to this interactive map. We won't be doing it right that evening. I mean, we're mostly going to be having refreshments and enjoying each other's company, but Greta is going to tell us how she's enabled this to become kind of a crowdsourcing project where we can all contribute to an interactive map. And it's a project that can go on for a long time. So I hope you can come on Thursday. For those of you who aren't on our e-bulletin list, you can sign up. We have a sign-up sheet in the refreshment room where we're going to be going afterwards, the tap room. So I hope you all join us after this program to mingle in the tap room. So without further ado, I want to welcome Emily Majer first, and we're going to uncover the...
Thank you all for coming, and I hope to move from abject terror into just panic. So bear with me, and when you yelp this later, please be kind. Thank you, Donna, for being here and doing this, and for sort of planting the seed that made this sort of curiosity into an obsession. So when I was at Bard 20-some-odd years ago, Manor was it was Siberia. It was the far north end of campus, and there was nothing else up there. There was no Fisher Center. There was no Parliament of Reality. There was no shuttle bus. So if you went to Manor for a party, for example, it was a trek. and sort of the last outpost. And at the time, I never really thought to wonder, why is there this amazing mansion? Because the party was so good, there was nothing to think about. But as time passed, I spent more time wandering under the bays, and there were these old foundations, and my curiosity was piqued. And so, a lot of you are probably familiar with the campus. Here's where Manor is, right next to the Fisher Center. And I like to start everything by saying, in about 1686, Peter Schuyler was granted a patent to what is now basically the town of Red Hook. It was 22,000 acres. And it was divided up by 1725 into, most of it was sold to a Dutchman named Baron van Benthuizen, who built a house that was referred to as a castle on the road down to Kruger Island. And his children partitioned off the rest of the land. In about 1790, General Armstrong purchased land that is now the site of Ward Manor from Van Benthuizen's heirs. And General Armstrong had been General Gates' aide-de-camp at the Battle of Saratoga, and then he married well to Alida Livingston. And so there was a building boom along the river after the Revolutionary War, because Margaret Beekman Livingston had ended up with a ginormous portion of land and a whole bunch of children, and she wanted to keep them close. And so she started to divide up her land among them. And let's see, I'm a bit confused. Anyway, Alida Livingston and John Armstrong built the first house on the site of Ward Manor, and they called it the Meadows. And it had the same basic layout as Montgomery Place. It had 2 connecting rooms on the west side, facing the river, and then it had 2 smaller rooms. On the east, there was a library and a dining room. Anyway. God, you people are so scary. So, all of the Livingston siblings ended up building houses along the river. There was Earl House, there was Montgomery Place. Down here you have Messina, which was built by John R. Livingston. And Meadows was a showplace, but Armstrong quickly grew tired of that and decided to move a bit south. And he built a house on the site of Blythewood called Mill Hill. So here in this map you have the Meadows, now Ward Manor. He moved down to Mill Hill, and then later went on to build Rokeby in 1815. Green dot here is Montgomery Place, and here in Marytown is Messina. So here is the St. Thompson map. And again, you can see, here is Meadows, Blythewood, and Messina. So when Armstrong moved to Mill Hill, he sold the property sold it to Chancellor Livingston, who held on to it briefly, and then sold it to a man named Andrew DeVoe, who was a bit of a reckless madman. He was a Southerner, and in 1783, he was in South Carolina, and he was young, he was loyal, and he left South Carolina and went to Florida and cooked up a scheme to take the Bahamas back for Britain. And so he assembled a small force, and he bought uniforms for them himself, and started off across the straits to the Bahamas, where along the way he picked up fishing boats and outfitted them as well. So when they arrived, I think it was New Providence, the people at the fort were terrified to see these boats and these soldiers, and they were also a bit confused because a treaty had been signed. And they'd already given the British back. But anyway, so they just wanted to, sort of play with this crazy man, and they were like, right, yes, absolutely, they are yours. And, you know, the British were grateful and also confused, and to reward DeVoe, they made him a colonel, and they gave him a plantation, and a stamp, and a song, and there's also a golf tournament, which persists to this day. So he left his father in charge of his plantation in the Bahamas and came up to New York, where he became sort of famous for being a dandy, and he married Maria Verplank and bought the Meadows, which he renamed DeVoe Park. And he added on to it a north wing and a south wing and a broad porch across the west side, with marble steps that went down to the lawn. And he was known locally for having a zoo of his own, where he had exotic animals, monkeys, kangaroos, and for the fact that every 6 months or so, boats would pull in to his landing, bringing bags of specie, which were the profits from his plantation. And he would then get in his carriage and he would drive around the countryside paying off his debts. He also threw wild parties at which there were sometimes duels. So, he fell down the stairs, the marble stairs, and hit his head, and died in 1812. And when this happened, he was found to be in embarrassed circumstances financially. And his widow had to put up his land for sale. So this is the advertisement. So if he owed you money, this was the time to come and get it. What he had done in the house, though, was kind of remarkable. It was noted that there were these colonnettes, these pilasters around the door. Oopsie. Oh. So this is Montgomery Place. These inverted candlestick pilasters on the sides of the doorways. Those were also at DeVoe Park. And there was a room on the west side of the house that that had inlaid bars of silver in the walls, and this and buttons also of silver. And the idea was that it was supposed to look like the sun, like when the sun would hit it, it was supposed to look like the sea. And also he had had mantelpieces installed that had carvings of the fort that he had taken over. So, the next person to purchase DeVoe Park was Robert Swift Livingston, who was a character in his own right. He was of the Manor branch of the family as opposed to the Claremont branch of the family. And he was trained as a lawyer. He went to Columbia and was a classmate of Washington Irving. He also was known for having no regard for convention and sort of the sort of social expectations of the time and his position. And he had at least 8 children with women who worked for him. But when he died, he divided his estate into 20ths and whacked it up among his kids and grandkids. And part of what was in his estate was this portion of Manhattan, which is from 84th Street to 87th Street, and this much. So his children all had his last name, and they all got a piece of the estate. When he was 80 years old, he married a woman who was 18. And they had a child who, well, we'll get back to that. Anyway, so he died, there's the huge estate, it all gets whacked up, and this is the advertisement for what was now Almont, because he didn't want to call it DeVoe Park. The name's Almont. And it was auctioned off, but purchased by his grandson, also Robert Swift Livingston. And then 10 years later, it burned to the ground. And so there are only 2 known images of this place, and this is one of them. And really all you're seeing is the chimneys. was big. So this is Robert Swift Livingston's youngest daughter, Mary Alice Elmont Livingston, who, the way that her father's will was structured, she was due to inherit $80,000 upon the death of her mother. And Mary Alice was as unconventional as her father. She had had 3 children with 3 different men by the time she was 30, and had sued 2 of them for breach of contract, and was then living in a hotel in New York City. And she was, 35 and really sick of waiting for her money. So she put arsenic in a clam chowder and had her daughter deliver it to grandma. And then grandma died. So it was 1895-ish, and this was the tabloid story, right? It was all over, and she was pregnant for the 4th time. So she's in the tombs, and she's pregnant, and it was this giant scandal because of her last name. And, she ended up, the judge ruled that she could have her inheritance even though she was in jail, even though she was on trial, because she argued she needed to pay her lawyer. And then she was acquitted anyway. So, be very careful when you're writing your wills. The next person to purchase what was then just land and ruins, was a man named Majer, who was a developer. And he was sort of like the first of the big developers. He developed Forest Hills on Long Island, and I think the first farm that he developed into a sort of spec property was the Macy farm of Macy's. And he bought the land in 1906 and logged it in order to build more. Like it was never going to be whacked up as a development itself property. But so he started logging the property, and then the mill burned. So whatever trees are left on the Lord Manor property now are because of a fire. And then one of the most exciting owners of the property, Lewis Gordon Hammersley, who was famous before he was born, because he had, okay, let's see, how does this work? Andrew Gordon Hammersley married Sarah Jones Mason. Sarah Jones Mason's father started the chemical bank and owned most of Manhattan. And Andrew Gordon Hammersley had one son, Lewis Curray Hammersley. And the 2 of them decided that Hammersley money needs to stay in the Hammersley family. They were very impressed with the family name. The Hammersley family had come to New York in about 1715, and they were merchants, and they were fantastically successful, and they sort of made a name for themselves when, after the Revolutionary War, they were pretty much the only family to stick their family crest on their carriage, and also to have their servants wearing liveries, which, sort of after the Revolution, that was a no-no. So Andrew Gordon Hammersley and Lewis Cray Hammersley, they say, all right, money stays in the family, in the name, so we're going to say that cousin James Hooker Hammersley's son, who is as yet unborn, will inherit the family fortune. And then these 2 die in the same year. So there's a lot of pressure on James Hooker Hammersley to have a child, right? Because otherwise this $7 million fortune is just going to go to charity. But there was a wife. So Lewis Cray Hammersley has a wife, they have no children, and the wife is Lily Price Warren, who was this nice girl from Troy. And what was said about her was that her face was her fortune. So when Lewis Cray Hammersley dies, he says that his widow can have use of the interest from his estate until she dies, and then it all will go to the heir. So she's got quite an income annually, and she marries the 8th Duke of Marlborough, as one does, right? She's the first of the Dollar Brides. She is Cora from Downton Abbey. And so the Hammersley money puts a new roof on Blenheim Palace. So then the 8th Duke of Marlborough dies, that's him. And she marries this guy, Lord William Beresford, who was a much decorated hero of the Zulu War.
Oh, no.
And what they say about Lily also is that she married a man for his money, a duke for a title, and a hero for love. So this child, this yet unborn child, James Hooker Hammersley scrambles around and finds a wife first. And they have a daughter who dies in infancy. And then they have another daughter. And then they have this son. They have Lewis Gordon Hammersley, and it's in all the papers that, you know, oh my God, $1 million baby. And within 4 years, he's an orphan. And a couple years go by, Lily Warren dies. She's had a child as well, and she wants, you know, she had wanted all of the money to her son, but anyway. So it becomes this lawsuit that is positively Dickensian, with like hundreds of litigants who are also, you know, the people who, the chemical bank fortune. There are lots of chemical bank heirs who would like a piece of this, and they say that this will is ridiculous, and how can you possibly, you know, put it all on someone who's not born yet. But the battle goes on for years and years, and Lewis Gordon Hammersley eventually prevails, and but his sister and his sister are raised in basically in isolation in this building in the city, and they're raised by a governess and a trust company. But they would also come up here, and so for several summers they rented Maysland. So Lewis Gordon Hammersley turns 21, and he sets to accumulating an estate, and he purchases the Almont property, and he keeps it in Almont, and he starts buying land to the north, which is now Tivoli Bays, and he buys all the way up to the Saul Bellow House, and he engages the services of the firm Hoppin and Cohen, who had built the Church of the Messiah in Rhinebeck, and they designed the Mount, and they designed Blythewood, and the renovations to Springwood, and a whole bunch of things on Long Island and in Newport. So, you know, big fancy architects. And they built what is now Manor for a contracted price of $70,000. So they build this, you know, amazing place, and in what is now Tivoli Bays, if you go in there, there's an old falling down barn, which in 1915 was state of the art, right? And it was, it cost almost as much to build as the house did. And Hammersley, he's a young guy, right? Like, he's at Harvard, and he throws a party in December of 1916, where there are special trains coming up from the city, bringing everybody who's anybody. And it's catered by a restaurant in the city, and he's got an orchestra all in the barn. And the house is not quite done yet. The gatehouse is almost done. People are just sort of camped out. And apparently this was the party to end all parties. And it was like Woodstock. Even if you weren't there, you said you were there. And so it's this massive party, and when it's over, Hammersley gets in his car and basically throws the keys in the bushes and doesn't come back. He goes back to Harvard, he graduates, and then he goes off to fight in France. And when he comes back, he's like, it is the sticks up here. I'm young, I'm rich. You know, this was like a childhood, you know, like the orphan boy builds castle, but nobody ever lived in it. And it was this, you know, beautiful gray Tudor. It was described as being not too big for a moderately sized family. It had like 5 master suites upstairs. This is looking at it from the west side. And this is a whole servants' wing with like kitchens and servants' rooms up here. There were bachelor quarters up here. And under the deck, under the stone terrace, is a squash court. And the real estate ad for it is amazing. It talks about, because the bays were part of it, so it talks about the amazing hunting opportunities and the ducks and everything. And there were, working farms. Hammersley purchased working farms that continued to be going concern as well. No one was here. So over the door of Manor, these are the crests that are there. This is for one of his great-grandmothers, and this is the Livingston of Callender crest because his fifth great-grandmother had been a Livingston. And it's a good calling card if you're in the Hudson Valley to have, put the Livingston Farm Center. And then this crest here is for an ancestor so far back, there's not enough grades to describe it, but he was the Lord Mayor of London, Hammersley, in 14 whatever. Anyway, so that's all still there. And on the gatehouse, there's only the Hammersley crest at the top. So, in about 1924, the place got put on the market. Oh, and here is Hammersley himself racing his aluminum cigarette boat, for which he won many trophies, including one that was handed to him there by Silent Cal Village. So here is the advertisement for the estate, and in 1924-25, $500,000 gets you 1,000 acres on the river. And it was purchased by William B. Ward before his father, Robert Ward, had started the Ward Baking Company, which in 1914 was the biggest baking company in the United States. And what they were known for was their cleanliness. And their big selling point, Mikey, was that human hands never touched a loaf of bread. Like, it came to you wrapped in paper, it had all been done by machines. And they were also the first baking company to have their stables be separated from where the baking happened. So that helped with the cleanliness as well. But Robert Boyd was known as a progressive who had been involved with lots of charitable organizations, and so his son had started this foundation in his name and purchased the land and the whole estate. And and in later years, the Ward Baking Company was purchased by the Continental Baking Company, which gave us Twinkies. Health and happiness. So the property was purchased by the Ward Foundation and turned over to the Association for the Improvement of the Condition of the Poor, along with $1 million endowment. And it was, basically it was turned over to the care of Donna's grandfather, who was described as an evangelical humanitarian. And he was born in England, and at the age of 12 was working in the spinning mills in Rhode Island. And then went to Williams College and Union Theological Seminary and became a minister. But while he was doing that, he was also working in tenement houses. And he said that once he had the collar on, people talked to him differently, and he didn't like that. And so he took off the collar and started doing, and sort of continued the work of looking at safety, like labor conditions in steel mills, and working with women and children and the Emergency Work Bureau. And Ward Manor was his, it was his project, and it's best sort of exemplified with this plaque it's a quote by Shelley that he put on the wall in the dining hall, or the dining room at Manor. It says, "You must come home with me and be my guest. You will give joy to me, and I will do all that is in my power to honor you." So it was this amazing communal, like, this progressive vision, right, of people living together, and he thought that as long as you were busy, that, you know, if you're doing something useful, you're gonna, it sort of keeps away the, you know, despair, right? And they quickly ran out of space in the manor, and so they engaged the firm Shreve and Lamb to design the Manor Annex in 1931, and at the same time, Shreve and Lamb were designing the Empire State Building. So it's kind of good to have the Geary Building and Shreve and Lamb and Hoffman and Cohen. There's a, you know, continuum of architecture of that. And even though it was never lived in as a house, like, it was presented in a very, you know, it retained the hominess. And the whole property was part of, it all became Ward Manor. So there was, so Manor was the residential old folks home, and then the landscape was really part of it. And so there was the Sunset Lodge, which was, it was like camp for old folks, mostly who lived in the city at another AICP-administered housing project. And they would come up for 2 weeks, 4 weeks in the summers. I love the looks on these ladies' faces. And then there was Ward Lee, which was, it had been a superintendent, farm superintendent house. And so this is a quote from, it was a letter that was written to William Matthews. So this was for women, at least in the 1930s. It was women who would come and stay as part of the Emergency Work Bureau. Women who had been working and then weren't. And like the idea that you need fresh air, you need to take a break, you need to get out of just the grind, you know, and take care. So, and this too, it's about the way that people were meant to be treated at Ward Manor, you know, the respect for everyone. Out on Kruger Island, there had been a mansion. This was the Kruger Mansion, and it had fallen into disrepair, and it was turned into a summer camp for boys. Right? So they took it all apart and built them cabins, and these young ruffians in 1929 had that out there. And then there were throughout the property.
I'm sorry, Emily.
Yeah.
They took that nice building apart and built their.
Well, it had fallen down. I mean,
Oh,
it was.
okay.
Yeah, this is, you know, 30 years later.
I see.
Yeah. And then this is a map of the manor. And so there were 4 girls' camps, right? So the boys' camp is out on Kruger Island down here. And then, White House, thank you, was up here for little girls, right? And there was Overhill down here for slightly older girls. And then the Gray Barns camp over here for like teenage girls. And then the Homestead, which is now a ham house up in Tivoli, was for what, 14 to 17-year-olds. And down here is the manor. So, and the bungalows. You can't forget the bungalows. So these were little housekeeping cottages that were scattered throughout the property. And like individual people would basically pay to have one built, right? And then they'd be rented to families for a few weeks at a time. And they were all named after hotels in the city. And these are Gray Barns girls who they would put on plays. So it was all integrated, right? So Saturday nights, people would come from the manor. They'd be bussed over to see productions put on by the kids. You know, and you know, the ball fields were behind the manor, so there's more just multi-generational living, and you know, the kids go to church at the chapel at Bard. And then here, funny enough, where the Bard farm is now, was one of the, you know, so they're producing their own food. There was a dairy herd and later an Angus herd. And so they were able to keep the cost, really, keep the cost down, which was good because for the longest time there wasn't a charge to be at Wood Manor. You would apply, and it was more about whether you could fit in, whether it was the right setting for you. And so the more self-sustaining could be, the better. And then there were events through the year where, okay, so this is the annual circus. And from what I've seen, the houses, the different bungalows, the different camps will be represented in banners and people dressing up as animals. It's a very, very big deal. And another annual event would be the birthday, which was October 31st because it was William Matthews' birthday. We would have, that was the day that they would celebrate everybody's birthday in the manor and have a big hoorah. But, you know, Donna's grandfather died in 1946.
Right.
And without his enthusiasm and tirelessness for the cause, the AICP, which had become the Community Service Society, they didn't have the will or the, you know, they were centered in the city, and so they started looking for ways to, you know, I think at first to keep it going, and so they looked at selling land, and they ended up selling 900 of the 1,000 acres to Central Hudson, who wanted to put a nuclear power plant on Kruger Island. But there is an article that talks about Central Hudson saying, we're going to have a nuclear power plant and a wildlife reserve. Luckily, public outcry prevented all that. But even so, even with only 100 acres, it was still too much. And in 1963, Bard bought the property, and at that point, it was Manor and the annex and Robin's house, which had been built around 1933. So it provided housing for about 100 students, you know, right out of the gate. So that was a good deal. And yeah, it's just a little better now. And it still looks a lot like it did when it, what Bard has done is to change what had been, they changed a porch into a faculty apartment into what is now the Manor Cafe, so that North Campus isn't quite so remote anymore. You can actually get a meal. But one of the things that's really magical about this whole thing is that there's a cemetery out in the woods where there are just these depressions, just these rows of depressions, and there are many residents of Ward Manor who are buried there. And with Greta and her students, there's an amazing project going on to sort of bring the cemetery back and find out who these people were. And so what's been going on is you know, finding the graves, and students are researching who these people were and putting together their stories. So Mrs. McGibbon, for example, fell downstairs and was killed. But also, so in 1958, when the Community Service Society was looking to get rid of the property, they did assessments of all of the residents that were still living there. in order to try and find out what would be a good place for them to go to, right? So Ella McGibbon had a husband, and this is his assessment. Harry McGibbon, 88 years old, was admitted to Ward Manor with his wife on 6/14/49. He was Methodist. Mr. and Mrs. M lost their business during the Depression and for many years supported themselves by making jams, jellies, and pickles for sale. They had a hard time financially, but they were very close to each other, and it was a satisfying marriage. Mrs. M appeared considerably more energetic and active than her husband, handicapped as he is by almost complete loss of vision. She continued to make her special watermelon pickles and other preserves, sold aprons, and did other handwork, was very cooperative in helping with any household need which might arise, and in serving on committees to help plan group affairs and activities. Unfortunately, Mrs. M died in an accident in 1957. Although it was a severe shock to Mr. M, he pulled himself together, and with understanding and help from other residents and staff, has recovered and is functioning even better than in his earlier years at Ward Manor. He has learned to do many things for himself. He continues to garden, planting several hundred bulbs this fall, and tending to his peach tree, which he planted from a seed from a tree he had in Brooklyn. He knows his way around and manages to do it surprisingly well, but could not be expected to adjust to a new setting. Everyone at Ward Manor feels that Mr. M's experience is a shining example of the many positives of group living, where every resident feels it is his own home and has a kind of familial interest in his neighbor. So it's very exciting to be, not just seeing plaques in the ground. And so this is William Matthews, and so he said that when the first resident of Ward Manor passed away, he got a local minister to come into the service, and it was such a dour event, and everybody left feeling awful. And so he said that whenever possible, he would do the services himself. And so, thanks to Donna, we have his coronet, upon which he would play taps. And apparently someone once said to him that taps is usually reserved for soldiers. And he said that he thought of all of these people as being soldiers of the common good, which we could all aspire to be. And now I'd like to turn it over for a bit of more personal information to this little lady.
When I was a little girl growing up in Red Hook, New York, and my friends would all go to summer camp, and they would say, well, Donna, don't you want to go to summer camp? And I would say, I live at summer camp. That was Ward Manor. We had a swimming pool which seemed endless. It looked like a city block in size. This is my friend Jackie, who loved Ward Manor so much when she and her family would come for 2 weeks in the summer to one of those bungalows. I think they stayed in the Ritz on Bungalow Hill. She loved it so much that, is Jackie here today? Yes, she couldn't make it. She decided after she retired that she would come to Red Hook and live. So she bought a house here a few years ago, and she now works at Bard in food service. That's this little girl here. We used to escape during the hot days of August and go down to the bays and go catfishing with her dad. There were trails going down from Bungalow Hill, which is, has anyone walked through Tivoli Bays from Bard to Kid Lane? So there's leaving from the area of the Fisher Center, there's a ravine, deep down and up. And when you climb up that hill, to the left was called Bungalow Hill, and that's where most of the 16 or so bungalows were sited. And down from there was our favorite fishing spot where we used to catch these catfish. It was a wonderful place to grow up and spend summers. The residents, that they were not residents, I might correct that, they were guests at Manor House and Robin's House. Were all adopted grandparents to my brother and me, because sadly we missed our grandfather in life. He just passed. I never met him. He was gone before I was born. So I just have stories about the boss, as he was called, William Matthews. I remember the Angus herds. It was a working cattle farm. The beef was sold. We had gardening, organic gardening, I believe. Bungalows, lots of friends, walking to Tivoli. My mother was a camp counselor, and she met my father, Donald Bruce Matthews, playing tennis one day next to the swimming pool. A few years later, I was born, and then my brother after me. Following my grandfather's passing, my father was in charge of Ward Manor. And really, so many of the families in Tivoli, especially Tivoli, were employed in building and grounds and farming and in all capacities on the estate. It was 1,000 acres. It was a sad day in the 60s when the threat of the power plant arose and Ward Manor was divided and sold. But the good news is that it exists today. It's owned by all of us, the taxpayers of the great state of New York. It's our park. And then, of course, a section of it is Bard College. I would be really happy to walk with you someday if you want to walk through and see where all of these cottages and pool and barns used to be. There's just one building left on the property now, the large barn. And it was fun to hear Emily talk about the party there, because what I remember is square dances. And the whole community would gather, and Mr. Pease of the Pease family in Tivoli would call the square dances. It was a wonderful time. It was a great time to be alive, and I'll leave you with the thought of that plaque, which still hangs in the dining room at the Manor House. Come home with me and be my guest, and I will do everything in my power to bring joy. That was the philosophy. So thank you very much, and I have all the pictures.
Does anybody have any questions before we go next door?
That was great. The image that you had of the Sunset Lodge, where was that?
The Sunset Lodge was on a ridge close to Kidd Lane. If you start on Kidd Lane.
Is that the same one that has the sign that says Sunset Lodge?
There isn't anything left
No,
of
if
it.
you pull in off Kidd Lane, like you're going to the canoe launch,
Yeah.
the road turns to the left and then goes back to the right. There's a big lump, and it's built on the foundation of an 18th century house.
Well, there's one thing I forgot to tell you. The lifeguard at this expansive pool was a very handsome young man named Woody Close. Big brother of Christy Close. The heartthrob of the community.
I blush to admit, those summers were absolutely miraculous. They were wonderful. Wood had borrowed that summer of '56. Walsh's Bill and Patsy had a 36 Ford that they'd given to us for a couple of summers. And Woody, at the age of then 18, 19, whatever it was, he painted the rear end of it. If you've ever seen President Roosevelt driving around in Hyde Park in movies, well, that was the car that Bill and Patsy had. So Woody painted it a red bottom or trunk lid and checkerboards on either side of the doors, and rode around some Ward Manor and back in that. And it was just a marvelous thing to go and spend the entire day swimming in the pool and meeting everybody and playing with all our friends. It was a special time in Red Hook, Italy, all of us together.
Yeah, I had a question. Was that Lauren Pease, who was the squared ass caller?
Well, we called him Runt.
Was he married to Gladys? On Montgomery Street?
Yeah. Yeah.
But my real question is, I was with Helene Teeger and she brought out a picture of some Bard students in a canoe on a ski slope. And she said that there were 2 ski slopes that Bard had.
Yeah, I remember one ski slope that was on the way down to Kruger Island.
So where the
It was a
hill
boat
breaks?
tow,
Uh-huh. Oh, okay. Yeah.
just west of Gay Lodge.
Interesting.
And you'd probably like to see these old photographs sometime. No ski pictures, but.
Yeah, no, they had a picture of Bard students in a canoe. In the 50s.
How are you working?
There's also a lot on the Hudson River Heritage.
I've seen those pictures.
Yes. And also just, Greta has some students who are going to be conducting oral histories, so it would be great if you have a connection to War Manor and would be willing to talk about it. Fantastic.
Is there some platform, some concrete platforms with poles sticking out of them, obviously tents?
Yeah,
What's that?
there was a row of tents just off of Kid Lane, rising up the hill.
Yeah.
Army-like tents.
Mystery solved. I just thought it was a missile silo.
I think it was boys camping.
Kruger and.
Yeah.
So about how many people were there in the summer then, when all the bungalows were rented and the kids went to summer camp? Do you have any idea?
Well, there were 16 or so bungalows, and they were rented for a nominal fee by working families from the city, so they could get fresh air and farm and get outside. So there would be that many in that community, and then the camps were 50 boys, 50 girls.
And then in the Manor and in Robin's house and the annex were the year-round guests. There's like 100 in there, so like 200.
Yeah, at least 100.
So maybe 200-ish people in the summertime.
Right.
I think maybe because they would cycle through also. And some of the cabins could be used into the fall, right, because they had fireplaces. So I think it depended on the year too. But yeah, thousands of people cycled through there and were affected by it.
I have just one footnote. For those of you who remember the bicentennial of Red Hook, which is now so far long ago we forgot, but we did put out a bicentennial calendar. And my favorite photograph of all time is of a bunch of Ward Manor camp girls on a 1928 Ford in the summer of 1940. And it is a spectacular photo. It is so redolent of the age that we so recently had here. Take a look at it. It's on our website, historicredhook.org. It's a marvelous photograph.
Hay rides too. Hay rides, yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like to give credit to the Ward Manor and Donna's relatives, because of that connection is what brought my family here to Red Hook. My grandmother was an administrator, I guess, at Ward Manor, and was also Donna's grandmother. And my parents, the first place we lived was in the gatehouse.
Huh.
And we have a lot of photographs of that vintage of, my parents are probably in their late 20s, early 30s. back then. So if it wasn't for that connection, that's how we wound up in Red Hook.
He's making a public commitment for the archives for the story. Interesting Schreiber, all right.
Well, we don't need it.
Yeah, so that was Steve Schreiber talking. This is a book written by my grandfather called Adventures in Giving. And this particular copy was inscribed, "My dear Mrs. Best," who's your grandmother. I think you may have given me this.
Yeah.
Given this back to me, Steve.
I have no kids, you do.
Right.
It's great. It belongs with you.
Any other questions? One more.
When Theodore Roosevelt was 8, he filled out observations of flora and fauna on the land and started the national park system. Is that true?
Is it there, or was it down at the Messina land? I don't know. I don't know, but I have heard that.
I heard the scene.
Yeah.
It was.
Yeah. But there's talk that Frederick Church hung out with Robert Swift Livingston, but I don't know if anybody would drink it.